Greetings, NAWCC Atlanta Chapter 24 members and friends, simulated from Vienna. The following video is a version of the presentation of the clocks of Vienna that I presented during the October 5th chapter meeting. Two errors of my doing rendered the October 5th recording unsuitable to be placed on our channel, and so I am redoing the presentation here and now. There was an update to the Zoom software that changed two important functions that I am now aware of. So since there is not an audience here today, there will be no interaction, and as a result, no questions and answers. This video is only about 20 minutes in duration. If you have questions related to the information provided here, please direct them to me through the Atlanta chapter page. That was a few bars from Mozart's 25th Symphony in G minor, and it helped establish Vienna as the original music city long before Nashville. Vienna was the home to Beethoven, Haydn, three Strausses, and Mozart. The first recorded history of Vienna is as a Celtic settlement in 500 BC. In the first century AD, it was a Roman military camp, the name of which evolved into Vienna. During the Third Crusade in 1189, at the Siege of Acre in Israel, English King Richard I, also known as the Lionheart, insulted his ally, who was the Austrian King Leopold, by raising only the English flag as the city walls were breached. King Richard then had no friendly return path home. He had already been in conflict with Spain and France, and his only allies up until this point had been Eastern Europe, Austria, and Hungary, and now he had alienated them. So as he attempted to return home incognito through Austria, he was captured and imprisoned by Leopold. Mediated by the Pope, his king's ransom financed the construction of the Ringmauer, which has effectively tripled the size of the medieval city of Vienna in 1192. The substantial walls then repelled Turkish sieges in 1529 and again in 1683. On this opening slide, in clockwise order from the top right, is one of numerous typical clock towers found throughout the city center. In the bottom is Belvedere Castle, built in 1723 as the summer residence for the Habsburgs. In the bottom left is Vienna's matriarch, Maria Theresa. She was the Habsburg Archduchess of Austria from 1740 to 1780 during Vienna's Golden Age. She was the mother of Marie Antoinette and of Joseph II, the Holy Roman Emperor from 1765 to 1780. Joseph II brought Mozart to Vienna in 1781, as is depicted in the film Amadeus. She is recognized as a leader who modernized education and public health services. And the top left is the hero Prince Eugene of Savoy, born in Paris in 1663. In ways he was could be considered the George Washington of Austria. He helped unite Austria and Hungary, which had long been an objective of the Habsburgs. But what did he do? He saved the Habsburgs from the French during the War of Spanish Succession from 1704 to 1709, and later he broke the westward thrust of the Muslims and Turks after a 150-year occupation of East Central Europe at the Battle of Belgrade in 1717. Commemorated in bronze at the Heidenplatz, Eugene is astride perhaps the first Lippinzender stallion. These highly trained and intelligent horses are a Vienna treasure. A few meters south of this square, across the Ringstrasse, is a campus of two fabulous museums, one natural history and another one is art. And in the center, we happen to stumble on a couple of these horses. That's funny every time. St. Stephen's Cathedral. St. Stephen's is a Romanesque and Gothic cathedral seen today in the Stephensplatz. It stands on the ruins of two earlier churches. The first St. Stephen's was consecrated in 1147 by German nobles who were about to embark on a second crusade. Consisting of 230,000 glazed tiles, the roof of St. Stephen's has an image of the imperial eagle and the coat of arms of the city of Vienna. The 446-foot tall South Tower is a dominant Vienna skyline feature. It took 65 years to construct, from 1368 to 1433, and in its time, it has housed 4 different clock movements. The cathedral was saved from destruction late in World War II when Wehrmacht Captain Gerhard Klinskirch disregarded orders to leave it in ashes. Unfortunately, in April of 1945, civilian looters lit fires in nearby shops as Soviet Army troops entered the city. Winds carried the fire to the cathedral, causing it to collapse. Fortunately, protective brick shells had been constructed over many of the internal treasures, and they were saved. Many were not. Rebuilding began immediately after the war, and it was fully reopened in 1948. St. Stephen's Cathedral has 23 bells in total. The largest is called Pummerin, which translates to boomer, and it hangs in the North Tower at 44,380 pounds and 10 feet 4 inches in diameter. It is the second largest swinging bell in all of Europe, after the 51,800-pound Peter in the Cologne Cathedral. Cast in 1711 from cannons captured from Muslim invaders, Pummerin was recast partly from its original metal in 1951 after crashing onto the floor when its wooden cradle burned during the 1945 fire. It sounds on only special occasions, including the arrival of New Year, and 6 bells also ring for the evening prayers and toll for funerals in this tower. The taller South Tower now has 11 electrically operated bells cast in 1960, used during masses. These are replacements for ancient bells also lost in the 1945 fire. The 2 that strike the hour, Primglock, which was recast in 1772, and Urschala, which was originally cast in 1449, mark the passing of the hours and the half hours. We were fortunate enough to be in the right place when these bells in the South Tower were rung during a mass. The 2 things about that clip, I don't know why it turns upside down, and the second piece is you may have noticed upside down. At the very end of it, there were a number of people who were down on the ground level, as we were when I recorded that, and many of them were holding their ears because of the volume of those bells. Speaking of the volume of those bells, in 1802, composer Ludwig van Beethoven realized the totality of his deafness when he saw birds flying out of this very bell tower as these very bells tolled, but he could not hear them. And so no discussion of a cathedral in Europe is complete without talking about the tombs. Prince Eugene of Savoy is entombed here, as well as Frederick III, the Holy Roman Emperor, under whose reign the Diocese of Vienna was erected in 1469. When the charnel house and 8 cemeteries abutting the cathedral side and back walls were closed due to an outbreak of bubonic plague in 1735, the bones within them were moved to catacombs below the church. Burials directly in the catacombs occurred until 1783, when a new law forbade most burials within the city. The remains of over 11,000 souls are in the catacombs. A few kilometers west of the city center is Hohner Markt and the Ankeruhr clock. An unusual Art Nouveau work was created by Franz von Mathisch and clockmaker Franz Marowitz between 1911 in 1914 per the Ankeruhr Insurance Company. The bridge is 30 feet wide and 20 feet high and connects the Ankeruhr insurance buildings, which are now hotels. The diameter of the clock dial itself is 12 feet, and it is a tribute to 12 historical Austrian figures, and each has Roman numeral pointer to the overhead horizontal scale in minutes as they march past the hours. At every full hour, another figure passes, accompanied originally by music from 800 tube organ. That organ is no longer functional, but there is electronic recreation of that organ. And at 12 o'clock noon, there is a parade of all 12 characters. If you're wondering who those 12 characters are, underneath the bridge, on the left side and the left pediment, there is a legend that identifies the notables that are included. And they include, at 1 o'clock, Kaiser Marcus Aurelius, who died in Vienna in 180. And at 2 o'clock is Karl der Grosse, also known as Charlemagne. Interestingly then, and eventually, at 8 o'clock, Johannes von Liebenberg was the Vienna's mayor who died heroically during the 1683 Ottoman siege. Oddly, at 8 o'clock, the organ plays "Oh My Dearest Augustine." I don't have a organ recording or the recording of this, what this actual clock sounds like, but to refresh your memory, if you're unaware of what "Oh My Dearest Augustine" sounds like. Everybody's familiar with that tune, and you gotta like it. Marx Augustine was in no way related to Liebenberg, but he was a legendary Vienna balladeer who, during the plague of 1679, got drunk and passed out in a ditch, was presumed dead, and thrown into a wagon headed for a mass grave pit outside the city. He woke the next morning and crawled out of a pit from beneath the dead. The song is said to have become a traditional Oktoberfest anthem played to honor the first beer drinker who passes out. The refrain, "All ist ist hin," literally translates to "all is lost," and it is a derisive idiom to shame one who cannot hold his liquor. And so the mystery to me is why they would select this particular tribute to a revered city hero. The earliest record of this building, the Vienna Clock Museum, is found in a 1547 city map. In 1690, Ferdinand Marchese, the commander of the town guard, bought the building and refashioned the interior and exterior in the Baroque style that is seen today. In 1921, mathematician educator Rudolf Kaftan expressed interest in displaying his clock collection. The city then provided him the building, which is in close proximity to the seat of the Watch and Clockmakers Guild, to establish the Uhrenmuseum. Other notable collections were then acquired. The oldest item on display is a 15th century watchman's clock from St. Stephen's that prompted the watchman high in the bell tower to ring bells at each hour. In that time, city tower clock movements did not often include strike trains, instead employing watchmen attached to the local guard to also serve as the bell ringers, as well as the fire watch and security. Adjacent to every item on display is a plaque that describes the item, its builder, and its place of origination, and other pertinent information about it. The top portion is in German, and there's a translation of the bottom in English. So this particular movement was built by Joachim Oberkircher, and it is the fourth and the final movement that was installed in St. Stephen's South Tower, where it ran for, in fact, 160 years. It powered 4 dials and was the first with a minute hand. It was later modified to add a recoil escapement. When the recoil escapements were invented by Englishman Robert Hooke in 1657, they became widely used in tower clocks in Europe later in the 1700s. So the crown and foilet were replaced. It was the first of the four in the tower to have a strike train. In about 1800, the tip of the tower began to lean to the northeast. Repairs in the 1820s and 1840s were unsuccessful, and in the 1860s, the heavy clock was removed and the spire was dismantled. It remained a stump for many years. The tower was eventually restored under the direction of famous architect Frederick Schmidt to its former stature, but without a clock dials, and using only the bells to indicate time, as it does today. Schmidt is also well known for classical architecture now found all along the Ringstrasse. The Ringstrasse was built in the footprint of the city walls when the Habsburgs determined that the fortress was no longer a priority. In one of the hallways, we stumbled across this collection of stunningly decorated 18th century wall clocks. And the art on these was amazing. And as you would expect, we ran into a display of lanturnluhrs, also known as Vienna regulators. Lanturnluhrs are empire-style wall clocks in delicate cases with glazed glasses on at least three sides, with up to as many as 3 on each side for a total of 9 glasses. And they were made during the late 18th and 19th century. They used tropical veneers over pine, featuring few or no hinges. So of that display of 5 lanturnluhrs, the one to the far left caught my attention. And it motivated me to assemble this presentation. It reminded me of Bernie Tekippe, a longtime member of the Atlanta chapter, who built a high precision mechanical movement that was at one point recognized to be the most accurate mechanical clock built to date. And that is well documented by NAWCC. There were a number of principles that Bernie espoused as what was necessary to build a clock of such high accuracy, and one clock employs one of Bernie Tekippe's principles of accurate mechanical clock design, which is to minimize the number of wheels. It accomplishes this by wrapping the cable directly around tandem and very small diameter crown wheel arbors. Like Bernie's clock, the movement is visible through a skeleton dial, but that's about where similarities end. Unlike Bernie's, this very unusual crown wheel has 150 teeth and therefore rotates once in 5 minutes, using a very wide verge instead of, as in Bernie's ingenious clock, having the verge directly and pallets directly on the pendulum stick. Since the drum now rotates once in 5 minutes, vice a typical regulator, which would have a large diameter drum that would typically rotate once in 12 hours, the fast weight drop rate is reduced by double compound pulleys, which decreases that drop rate by a factor of 4. The complexity of the motion works are hidden behind the shield and not apparent. Unfortunately, the museum archives have no record of the maker or of its date of acquisition. It is estimated to have been made in about 1810 and also believed to have originated in Vienna. Per the Uhrenmuseum's curator, Tabea, the components of this clock exhibit almost no wear. It was disassembled and examined in February of 2025, but the staff was unsuccessful in returning the clock to running order. Because the clock exhibits no wear, it's not a certainty that this clock ever really did run. Apparently, Vienna has had to wait another 200 years for Bernie's movement to demonstrate the axiom of a minimum number of wheels and to see it successfully executed. Another lanturnluhr, this example features barometric pressure compensation. As described in a plaque nearby, higher atmospheric pressure causes an increase in density, air density, and resistance to the pendulum swing, increasing the period. The rising manometer leg counteracts this effect independent of the temperature compensation. As explained on a nearby plaque, other methods to compensate for barometric pressure swings include using the sealed bellows to raise the weight, as is sometimes seen on some reflow clocks. It further explains that without temperature compensation, mechanical clock accuracy is limited to about 10 seconds per day. With temperature compensation, a second per month is possible. Barometric compensation is required for additional improvement and to overcome the effects of barometric pressure swings. Ultra-accurate mechanical locks are often placed in controlled partial vacuums. Another collection high point to me included these beautifully inlaid and engraved 18th century Dutch long case clocks. This concludes my presentation on the clocks of Vienna. There were hundreds of clocks and watches in the Uhrenmuseum and so much else to see in this marvelous historic city. My hope is that this presentation has left you with a curiosity and desire to experience Vienna.